Okay, I'm going to share the screen now. Hmm. Okay, is the screen visible? Is it large enough?
We could see the screen, Bhante.
Okay, okay, good. Yeah, I have to relearn how to set everything up on the computer now. Okay, I
Can
use
read.
in Spotlight. You can read.
No,
You can't see the text?
I see the text, but I can't see what it says.
If you can, Bante, if you can make the font a little larger, there you go.
Yeah, that's much better, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't click the record yet. Okay, I'm
Recording
clicking.
in progress.
Okay. Yeah, I have another file, so if okay. Okay, so now we're continuing with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of the Fours, which we've been working through, I think about, well, I remember we started this, we went through this during the period of 2020. I remember we started about Sutta 31 in this collection in 2020. So we would have actually started at 2019. But we're getting to the end, and I'm going to go a bit quickly through the final suttas in this chapter so that we could finish maybe in a month or two. Okay, so now we're up to sutta number 197, and this is about a woman named Queen Malika. But first, let us start in the usual way with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so the protagonist in this sutta is Queen Malika. And who is Queen Malika? She was the wife of the king of the state of Kosala, who reigned at Savatthi, named King Pasenadi. And what's interesting about Queen Malika is that she came from a poor family. And this maybe illustrates the way karmic connections from past lives operate. She came from a poor family. I think she was like maybe a flower girl, like she would collect flowers and then sell them to rich people who would buy them to make offerings to the deities. And one day, King Pasenadi with his entourage came riding down the road where she was selling the flowers. And as soon as King Pasenadi looked at her, he fell in love with her and asked her father for her hand in marriage. And so she went from being like a peasant girl selling flowers by the roadside to being the queen of the state of Kosala. And she became a very devout disciple of the Buddha, though apparently she never reached any stage of attainment during her lifetime. There's no record of her reaching any stage of attainment. And this is apparently maybe her first encounter with the Buddha, because at the end of the sutta, she declares that she goes for refuge to the Buddha. And so here she comes and she poses some questions to the Buddha. So she asks, why is it that some women in this world are, and then it uses chains of synonyms for basically three qualities mentioned here. One is being ugly, in other words, ill-formed and unsightly. The second is being poor, and the third is lacking in influence. So that is the first possibility. The second possibility, some women are ugly, but they're rich and influential or powerful. And then the third possibility is that some women here are beautiful, poor, and lacking in influence or powerless. And the fourth possibility is that some women here are beautiful, rich, wealthy, and influential. And then I created a little file to map out these possibilities. So the first is, we call this the triple negative. So ugly, poor, and powerless. Those three undesirable qualities. And the second set of alternatives has two positives, but one negative. That is being ugly, and the two negatives, I'm sorry, the two positives are then being rich and being powerful. The third possibility has one positive, but two negatives, being beautiful, but being poor and powerless. And then the fourth has a triple positive, in a mundane sense, three desirable qualities: being beautiful, being rich, being powerful. And even though these are mapped out under each heading, three qualities are mentioned. But what one will notice, if one looks at them closely, you could see that you could be rich and powerful or poor and powerless. These occur together. But no case is mentioned of being rich and powerless or of being poor and powerful. So this implies that wealth and power go together. So these are really just, in a sense, two variants of one cluster, within one cluster. But you can be beautiful. So being beautiful can go either with being poor and powerless or with being rich and powerful. So really, even though three qualities are mentioned under each heading, but you could sort of put maybe a dotted line between 1 and 2 and 3. So 2 and 3 will always go together as a pair, but 1 can match either quality 1 can match the variance of 2 and 3, or 2 and 3 can match the variance under number 1. And so here I say that being miserly and envious go together, and being generous and without envy go together. But no case is mentioned of being miserly, but without envy, or of being generous but envious. So being patient, that is without anger, can go either with being miserly and envious, or with being generous and non-envious. Okay, so Mallika comes to the Buddha and asked, what are the reasons why we find these particular clusters or combinations of qualities, or we could call these even these destinies that women undergo. And even though she phrases this by way in terms of women, I would say that probably these same clusters of qualities go together in the case of men as well. But since she's a woman, she's particularly concerned with the destinies of women. Yeah, I was thinking initially when I read the sutta, I was thinking that from a contemporary perspective, one might see it as having a bit of a sexist slant to it, in the concern on the one hand with being ugly or being beautiful, but in fact also I think men also desire to be attractive and not to be ugly. But then from my own perspective, I would say that being beautiful or ugly is not a matter so much of facial features, but I would say that it's qualities of the heart or of the soul, and those can show forth in facial features, so that even though a person might have a genetic disposition towards being what we would say ugly, but if they develop beautiful qualities of the heart, those will show forth in the face. And so a person can be very attractive, charismatic, beautiful, even though the inherently formed genetic facial features would be traditionally or typically classified as ugly. And also, I'd also have to add here that there's a certain maybe cultural or ethnic basis for forming judgments about what is ugly, what is beautiful. So that maybe white people coming from the Nordic countries will judge qualities of beauty as being having very white skin, having blonde hair, blue eyes. And if they look at Black people, people from South Asia, they would say unattractive. But people from of African descent or South Asian descent or East Asian descent would look at the white people and say, oh, how could they be attractive? How could anybody find a person with such pale skin and blonde hair? That's an aberration. Yeah, I remember many years ago when I was in graduate school, a Tibetan a man originally from Tibet came to study in that same graduate school, Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California. And a few months after he arrived in the US and came to study at the university, he sort of confided with me, how can you American men find the American women beautiful? I mean, look, light colored hair, such pale skin, such flat noses, not beautiful at all. How could people elevate them to the status of movie stars or beauty queens? And I said, just that's the way it is from our perspective. But after some time living in America, he wound up marrying an American wife. Okay, so these are the questions that Mallika poses to the Buddha. And then the Buddha explains this on the basis of karmic dispositions expressed in action, both action and qualities of the mind or heart, which manifest in these, on the one hand, in physical features of the body, and also in one's situation in life. One's, maybe call it the social and economic situation. And then I've sort of illustrated this in my little file by using an arrow to show the karmic cause. And then I put the karmic cause, I simplify the expression on the right side of each of these enumerations. Okay, so the Buddha says here, some woman is prone to anger and easily exasperated. She gets angry easily. Even if she is criticized a little bit, she loses her temper and becomes angry, hostile, stubborn. And then in her behavior, she displays anger, hatred, and bitterness. Whoops. Actually, the sutta doesn't actually state it so explicitly. So I had to sort of map it out by using numbers. So it's this quality of so it's this quality of getting angry easily and of expressing one's anger readily with little provocation that leads to being ugly. And I think sort of we could understand the reason for this is that if you look at your own face when you become angry, you see that the face becomes ugly. You knit the eyebrows together, you clench your mouth, your teeth, you wrinkle up the face. And so when you get angry, the facial expression becomes ugly. And then even if when the anger passes, the face relaxes, the muscles loosen up, the eyes can become bright and shiny, but it creates that flash of anger, creates a disposition, a karmic seed in the mind with the potential to ripen in the regular type of facial expression that one displays when one becomes angry. So then on the occasion of rebirth and when one grows up and reaches maturity, the face will tend to have that kind of expression that it acquires when one is overcome by anger. At least that's the explanation that I would give for the principle that underlies the sutta. And I think you could maybe even see how this works out, even without reference to the working of karma from one life to other lives. If one takes the case of a person who habitually and regularly becomes angry, often becomes angry, you could see that those features that one displays when one becomes angry sort of become imprinted on the face, become sort of stamped onto the face. So even when the anger passes, but over time, if one repeatedly becomes angry, the facial features sort of become transformed, molded, just like a block of clay at the hands of a sculptor, so that one starts to sort of impress upon the face those regular features that are acquired in bouts of anger. So if you meet sometimes you meet somebody for the first time, you know nothing about them. They walk into the room and you have to shake hands with them or have a little chat with them. But just even when they just come into the room, you feel kind of negative vibrations, some kind of uneasiness in their presence, a little bit of fear or apprehension in their presence. And then when you look at the face, sort of you're deterred by it. Whereas you see another person with a very pleasant and smooth face, and you feel pleasant vibrations, beautiful vibrations in their presence. But even though that might be a general rule, what I would say is don't rush to make quick judgments on the basis of facial features or the appearance of a person. Since I've known in many cases in the past, or at least some cases, of people, when you initially meet them, they have rough facial features. They even look angry and even wrathful. But when you get to know them, you could find that they're very pleasant and kind and compassionate people. And then I've known other people who have been very smooth manner, very bright, winning smile, very soft, gentle, attractive speech, very nice tone to their voice. But when you get to know them, you realize that they're swindlers, cheats, deceivers, tricksters, not to be trusted. So don't come to quick judgments, but you could use that as a kind of maybe a prima facie principle of relating to the other person. Okay, so it's this disposition to anger that creates facial features that would be, maybe we could say generally within that culture, within that social setting, lead to the assessment of that person as being ugly, badly formed, unsightly. Okay, then the second sort of karmic disposition mentioned by the Buddha here is being reluctant to give. And so in this case, she does not give things to ascetics or Brahmins. And this is using the paradigm example of giving against the cultural, social background of the Buddha's time, where there are the communities of the religious renunciants who depend for their livelihood upon the offerings, the generosity of others. And so in this case, the woman, or could be a man as well, does not give the basic supports of life to ascetics or Brahmins. There's food and drink, clothing, and well, in the case of Buddhist monks, it wouldn't be vehicles, but maybe when they need a ride from time to time, offering a ride, giving garlands, scents, and unguents, bedding, dwellings, and lighting. Actually, some of these things are not appropriate for Buddhist monastics, things like garlands, scents, and unguents, but the basic requisites for the Buddhist monastics would be food, and drink doesn't mean alcoholic drink, but things to drink. And of course, clothing would be essential, robes, and the dwelling place with beds and lights. And so this general quality, which here I call miserliness, not giving to others, would become the karmic cause for being poor. Because when you give to others, then you are sharing one's possessions, one's wealth, one's goods with others, and that is creating the karmic disposition for receiving benefits in return. And so when one is miserly, even though one retains one's wealth and possessions here and now, so that one could be very rich in this life, but that creates the karmic tendency towards poverty. And then the third quality mentioned is being envious. So that is envying and resenting the gain, honor, respect, esteem, homage, and worship given to others. So that is maybe those, and you have to remember that the Indian society of the Buddha's time was stratified into rather fixed and rigid and quite precisely defined social classes. There was very little social mobility in the Buddha's time. So we have the higher castes, the Kshatriyas, who are the rulers and administrators, the Brahmins, who are the priestly caste performing the religious services, the Vaishyas, the business class, who control the trade, the business enterprises, the financial system, the Shudras, who are the workers, and those outside the caste system, who are called the outcasts. And so one who envies the higher position of others and begrudges their gain, honor, respect, then creates the karmic disposition for lack of power, lack of influence. Okay, so in this first case, we have the triple negative, that is getting angry easily, being miserly, being envious of others. So that those three qualities in one life create the karmic disposition for in a future life becoming ugly, becoming poor, becoming powerless. You know, I have to say it, from a contemporary perspective, we can raise questions whether karma can reasonably explain all the differences in the dispositions of sentient beings. You know, it might seem a little bit maybe heretical from my perspective, but I would actually question whether karma adequately explains all of these differences in the positions of beings. I would say that certainly from a contemporary perspective, I would say that there are flaws, say, within our economic system and the political system, which largely constructs, maintains, and even exacerbates the economic system that accounts for poverty, lack of opportunity, the way the wealthy hoard their wealth and sort of apply their influence to the political system, say, to maintain, say, low wages for workers, and the way the people who are at the head of the corporations refuse to allow the workers to form unions so they can improve their economic status, and the way the tax system is so structured that wealth will flow to those in positions of wealth and power and push people out from the middle class into the lower classes. And so I would say a lot of the explanation for poverty and lack of power, lack of influence, stems from contemporary causes in the structure of the social and the economic system. But anyway, I'm just explaining the sutta on its own terms and not from my own perspective. Okay, so in the next case we have here of the woman who's beautiful but poor and powerless. I'm sorry. The second case is that of a woman who is judged to be ugly, but she's rich and powerful. Okay, so what is the karmic explanation for this? So in a previous life, she's prone to anger and she's irritable, gets angry easily, lashes out at others with anger. But she's generous. She gives the basic requisites to ascetics and Brahmins, and she is without envy. She doesn't envy the gain, honor, respect given to others. And so when she passes away from that state, if she comes back to this world, that is to the human state, then wherever she is reborn, because she was angry, irritable, she becomes ugly. But because she was generous, she is born into a rich family, or perhaps she acquires wealth later in life, either through her own efforts or through a fortunate marriage, and she becomes powerful or influential. Somehow she can exercise influence within her family, community, or even the whole society and nation. And so this little diagram, it shows the karmic reasons in a very concise form. It shows the karmic reasons for these three conditions. Anger leads to ugliness, generosity to wealth, being without envy, or more positively, being appreciative, having mudita for the good fortune of others, leads to being influential and powerful. And then we have the third alternative now, the third case. We have the woman who has beauty, physical beauty, but she lives in poverty and she's without power or influence. So in this case, the woman, to explain this, the woman in the previous life was not irritable, given to anger, to hatred, to bitterness, but maybe we could say more positively, she was disposed towards metta, towards loving kindness. But even though she had loving kindness and gentleness, but she was not generous. She didn't give to others. And she was envious, and so she envied the good fortune of others. A little bit strange, being not prone to anger. She would maybe she didn't have metta in a strong sense, but she was patient. She had patience when provoked. Because in this case, I would think that if there was metta, loving kindness, it would have naturally flowed into generosity and mudita, altruistic joy. So she wasn't given to anger, but she was not generous. She was miserly, and she was envious. And so in this case, she winds up beautiful, but poor and powerless. And then in the fourth case, we have the woman who gains the three positive qualities. She's beautiful, wealthy, and powerful. So the karmic explanation for this. So in a previous life, she was not prone to anger, but she was patient. She would always keep her mind under control, not giving way to anger, not lashing out at others. She was generous, giving to support ascetics and Brahmins, and she was without envy. She didn't envy the gains of others. And so as a result, if she comes back into the human realm, wherever she is reborn, she is beautiful, she is rich and influential. So the Buddha just sums up, repeating the explanation. And then Mallika now makes a kind of proclamation to the Buddha, almost a confession, or at least a hypothetical confession. She says that she assumes that in some earlier life, she was prone to anger and so forth, readily displayed anger, hatred, and bitterness. And so therefore, she says, now I'm ugly, ill-formed, and unsightly. Maybe it's not easy for a woman to admit this, but she openly declares that she's now ugly, ill-formed, and unsightly. But she must have been generous, she says, because now, even though she was born into a poor family, but when King Pasenadi saw her selling flowers on the roadside, he fell in love with her and took her as his wife. And so now she's rich and has great wealth and property. And so she's now also, because she's the queen, so she has great power and influence. So she supposes that in some earlier life, she was without envy and so on. Okay, so then she also goes further. She says, in this court, she says, there are girls from the Kshatriya, Brahmana, and householder families who are sort of subject to her command. And now she makes a kind of aspiration or vow. She says, from today, I will not be prone to anger and so forth. Oh, I see. So yeah, so she's saying that she's now influential because now she exercises command over all of the girls in the court, whether they come from the Kshatriya, Brahmin, or householder families. And what's interesting also, just a little side note, when the Buddha is describing the social structure of Northeast India during the period in which he's living, then he has to divide that society into the four classes: the Kshatriyas, Brahmanas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. And sometimes he'll mention those who don't fall into any of the four castes or social classes. They're called the Chandalas and some of the other sort of menial laborers who don't even fall within the class of the Shudras. But when the Buddha is speaking with reference, or the Buddhist text in this case, speaking with reference to the Buddhist community, or to the, let's say, to the society from a Buddhist perspective, then it just speaks about the Kshatriyas, Brahmanas, and the householders. So they have to retain the Kshatriyas as a separate class because those are the rulers of the various states in Northeast India. And the Buddha is somewhat deferential towards the Brahmins, because the Brahmins are the ones who perform the regular religious services of the time. They are the ones who perform like the blessings for newborn babies, who perform marriage ceremonies, who perform the rites and rituals for the kings. And so the Brahmins and the Brahmins also have a certain amount of power in the society. So they have to be retained as a separate social class. So the Buddha will reject their claims to be a kind of divinely blessed, divinely ordained superior caste. But the Buddha will retain them as a separate class because they have their own distinct functions to perform. But all of the other communities in the society, whether the Vaishyas, that's the business class, the Shudras, the working class, or the so-called outcasts, are all just merged together under the heading of householder families. And so when Mallika is speaking here, the text is formulating her words from a Buddhist perspective on society, rather than from the traditional Brahminic perspective on the society. Okay, and then Mallika makes her sort of vow or aspiration, sort of not to be prone to anger in the future, to be generous, to give things to ascetics or Brahmins, and not to be envious. So in other words, she makes the determination to create the seeds, the karmic seeds, for a future life in which she'll be beautiful, wealthy, and influential or powerful. And then here, this is what makes me think that this must be her first encounter with the Buddha, or at least her first conversation with the Buddha. Because here she declares the standard formula for going for refuge. She says, excellent Bhante, It's wonderful how the Dharma has been so well proclaimed by the Buddha, just as if a man were to turn upright what was upside down, to reveal what was hidden, to point out the road to one who is lost, or to bring a lamp into a dark room. And then she says, I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dhamma, the Sangha. Let the Blessed One consider me a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life from today onward. Okay, so that is the end of the sutta. So maybe any questions, or I'd like not only questions, but comments. And the way to pose questions or to make a comment. Oh, you will have it. I don't have it. But at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see something called reactions, a feature called reactions. And in that, you will see, if you click reactions, then a number of icons will appear. And one of those icons will be the hand, the raised hand. And then you click that and your hand will be raised. Okay, so I see already 2 hands raised. One, and I take the hands in the sequence in which they appear. So the first is Vinyu, I think. And
Yeah.
then when I call on you, you unmute.
Yes, good morning,
Good
Bhante.
morning.
Hope all well. I have, in fact, I have 2 questions about Malika. I understand that Malika and King Pasamadi, they have a daughter called Princess Vajira.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, could you confirm that she actually married Emperor the Ajatasattu?
Yeah, that is said. That is said. Yeah.
And Ajatasattu, in the sense that Mexico, the Sakyan, the clan, the Sakyan.
No.
It's not.
No,
It's
that was not Ajatasattu who did that. That was the king, I'm sorry, the son of King Pasenadi, whose name comes out in Pali, something Vidudaba. Vidudaba.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and what happened with King Vidudaba? Okay, King Pasenadi had made the Sakyan state, it was a kind of, the Sakyan state became a vassal state of the kingdom of Kosala. So the kingdom of Kosala was a powerful state in northeast India. And the Sakyan had been originally a republic, and then it was sort of subdued by Kosala and became a vassal state, a dependent state under Kosala, the state of Kosala. Just, I mean, just like today, just like Russia is trying to turn Ukraine into a vassal state of Russia. And so King Pasenadi, sort of to cement the relationship, he demanded from the Sakyans that they send a Sakyan woman, a Sakyan maiden, to become his wife. But the Sakyans were a very proud people, and they resented being subjected to the rule of Kosala. And so they sent King Pasenadi a slave girl. But they didn't tell him that. So the King Pasenadi thought that he was marrying a Sakyan princess. Okay, but at a later time, and then from that, the union of King Pasenadi and the princess, I don't remember her name. I'm sorry, and the slave girl, I don't remember her name offhand. So a son was born, and that son was named Vidudaba, who became the heir apparent, the crown prince under King Pasenadi. King Pasenadi Prince Vidudeeba was very ambitious, and so he overthrew his father. He expelled his father from the kingdom and took over the kingdom for himself. But then, on a visit, he made a visit to the Sakyan state, and there he learned that his mother was a slave girl, not a princess. And so he became furious, overwhelmed by anger. And so when he returned, he made the to his capital, he made the determination to eliminate the Sakyan people. And so he launched a military campaign against the Sakyan state, in which he prevailed, and he massacred virtually all of the Sakyans.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, though some managed to escape, and so there's still descendants of the Sakyans still alive today. I think mainly in Nepal or in northern India. Okay, you had another question.
Yes, I have another question, which is about Queen Malika. It's in the commentary, which is said that Queen Malika, before she died, she actually regretted. Then she went into the hell. And one of the reason was because that she was having a sexual intercourse with a dog. And how reliable is this commentary?
Yeah, I was a little bit reluctant to mention that in my own talk, but since you brought it up, then I have to mention this. Yeah, this comes in the commentary. It says that Malika had a big dog of which she was very fond. And one day when she was taking a bath, I think the dog came into the bathing room, and the dog became sexually excited, maybe because Malika was undressed. And then the dog came up behind her and, had sort of sexually entered her sexually, and she enjoyed it. And so as a result of, and then King Pasenadi, if I remember the story, sort of peeked into the bathing room and saw the dog humping Queen Malika. And then he asked her about it later, and Malika lied to him and said, oh, that must have been just an optical illusion. And she did something she performed a trick to try to convince King Pasenadi that by looking through the window of the bathing room, or a chink in the wall of the bathing room, that it would create an optical illusion. So she both had sexual relations with an animal, and then she lied about it to cover it up. And so those two activities created unwholesome karma. So it said that when she passed away, then she was reborn for a very short time in one of the hell realms. But then after a short period of torment in hell, then she passed away and was reborn in a heavenly realm. Yeah, how reliable is the commentary? I never know how reliable the commentaries are. However, what I would say here in support of the commentary is that the general tendency of the commentary is to glorify, extol, and to elevate to unbelievable heights disciples of the Buddha. So if the commentary reports on a kind of severe, very serious, grave moral transgression on the part of the woman who was one of the main supporters of the Buddha, it would seem that the commentary is trustworthy on this point. That would be my supposition.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I have no further question. Thank you.
Okay, next is Sud.
Hello, Bhante. Thank you for your excellent teaching again. So what is the karmic significance of making these vows in Buddhism? I mean, someone can be very enthusiastic after they read lots of Dhamma and say, oh yeah, I'm going to, be verbally, compliant with, let's say, non-gossip and so on and so forth. And then later on break it. I mean, what does Buddha say about what would be the karmic significance? If somebody, let's say, makes a determination, and then later on breaks it, and then makes a determination again, and later on breaks it. I mean, it is a training, but is there any bad karmic consequence of doing so?
Okay, what I would say first is for the significance of making these determinations. Like if you make the determination just one time, okay, I'm not going to let myself get angry easily. I'm going to be generous. I'm not going to be envious. You make it one time, and then you think that's enough, that's sufficient, and then you just forget about it. In that case, you're not building up a strong mental force, and so you could easily transgress or violate the determinations that one has made. And so what I sort of suggest as a practice, if one wants to build up strong tendencies or dispositions or strong contrary forces against one's mental unwholesome dispositions, is that one makes the determination as a regular practice, even a daily practice. And in that way, day after day, you're building up a strong counterforce to the unwholesome tendency, so that the unwholesome tendency will gradually become weaker and weaker, and the counterforce will become stronger and stronger. I mean, well, in my own case, in the past, I used to get angry so easily. And I used to become angry and upset, and sometimes even a tendency to be explosive, not in physical violence, because I'm not physically very strong, but using sharp, cutting words against others. And then this was before I encountered Buddhism, and maybe even the early years after my encounter with Buddhism, but my first teacher told me that you should make a mental determination every day to be patient and restrained under all conditions, no matter how difficult and provocative they might be. And I did this for many years. Maybe I haven't been so, I have to be a little careful. Maybe I have to start resuming that practice. But for many years, I would do that as a daily practice. And the anger went down very, very much. Not completely gone, but maybe it's gone down maybe 80% from what it used to be. Maybe some of my regular friends can give me some feedback, whether I get angry easily or not. Yeah, so this is the benefit of making a daily determination. You could do it as part of your meditation practice. You do the period of sitting meditation. And then at the end, it just takes like 1 minute, even 30 seconds. You make maybe 3 determinations on 3 qualities. And these are 3 good ones here, 3 useful ones. Not to be not to get angry easily, to be generous, and not to be envious of others. Though you could find others, if you tend to be lazy, not to be lazy, but to be energetic. If you tend to be a little deceitful in one's speech, to adhere strongly to truthful speech. If you tend to even to physical violence, the determination not to express one's anger through physical violence. Yeah, does that answer the question okay?
Yes, Bhante,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah, what happens if you violate that determination? I don't know, but at least I could say that the benefit of making the determination is that as you do it regularly, it will build up that counterforce, which gradually overshadows and maybe eventually eliminates the tendency one wants to eliminate. Okay, we have another question. This will be from Jacob Rosenberg. Okay, good. You know how to unmute.
Hello, thank you for taking the question. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, very easily, yeah.
All right. I was considering these kind of 3 qualities of existence: beauty, wealth, and power. Do you think they tend to lend themselves to a sort of cyclical existence? I was particularly concerned with wealth, that the rich tend to be miserly and thus become impoverished in the next life, and those in poverty
Yeah.
tend to be generous.
Yeah, that, I don't say that that's a universal rule, but there is definitely a kind of cyclical pattern to them. Yeah. So somebody, okay. So the case that you mentioned is very, very true. And we could see this even if we look at our contemporary society. We could see that people who are very rich, at least in certain segments of the population, are pressing for changes in the tax, for tax cuts, reduction on taxes on their corporations, their business enterprises. They oppose higher wages for workers. They cut their workforces. They transfer their enterprises to low-income countries with poor regulations so that they could increase their wealth. Yeah, so in that way, they are creating the conditions for the karmic conditions for poverty in the future. But it's not necessarily the case. Whoops. And this reminds me that there's a sutta, you could look at it, it's also in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fours. We would have taken it maybe a couple of years ago. It's somewhere maybe around sutta number 30 something. But it explains that there are four destinations, or sort of, four